Hi everyone, thank you for joining our session today. I'm Nadia Jeffrie and I'm going to be sharing with you the key findings from our 2024 Mobile Gender Gap Report. So the Mobile Gender Gap Report series is an annual report that we've been publishing for the last 7 years, enabling us to comment on trends in the gender gap across low and middle income countries, or LMICs. The findings in our latest and previous reports are drawn primarily from the GSMA Consumer Survey and is supplemented by other third-party data. But this nationally representative survey has been conducted face-to-face each year since 2017, with the most recent survey covering 12 LMICs at the end of 2023. It's gathered critical data on the mobile gender gap and allows us to continue monitoring women's access and use of mobile and how this compares to men. So from 2017, the gender gap in mobile internet adoption was consistently narrowing up to 2020 when it stood at 15%. This was, of course, good news. However, last year on International Women's Day, we shared that for the second year in a row, there had been a slowdown in digital inclusion for women and that once again, progress in reducing the mobile internet gender gap had stalled. After those years of progress, women were being disproportionately negatively impacted in the immediate aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the mobile internet gender gap widened to 19% in 2022. Our latest data shows that the mobile internet gender gap in LMICs narrowed from that 19% to 15% in 2023, meaning women are now 15% less likely than men to use it. This reduction was due to women adopting mobile internet at a faster rate than men. In fact, in 2023, fewer men started using it compared to 2022, but there was an increase in the rate of adoption by women. The gender gap is now back to where it was in 2020. This recent narrowing represents a promising shift, and this is especially in comparison to the previous 2 years. But it's not yet clear if women's rate of adoption will continue to increase and whether the mobile internet gender gap will continue to narrow. And this gap is also still very wide, with 265 million fewer women than men using mobile internet in LMICs. So that recent reduction in the gender gap in mobile internet adoption across LMICs has been driven primarily by South Asia, where it decreased from 41% in 2022 to 31% in 2023. The gender gap in sub-Saharan Africa also narrowed somewhat from 36% to 32% in 2023. But it's not significantly lower from what it was in 2017, which was 34%. And as you can see, the mobile internet gender gap is much lower in the other regions, where it has also remained relatively unchanged. So although we have seen some promising signs over the last year, especially in South Asia, there is still a substantial gap in mobile internet adoption across LMICs, with 66% of women in these countries using mobile internet now. And this is more women than ever before, but it is still much lower than men, 78% of whom now use it across LMICs. And there are significant regional variations in this gender gap in the total number of women who still do not use mobile internet. So the biggest gaps in mobile internet adoption continue to be in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, where the gender gaps are 31% and 32% respectively. And this is compared to a gender gap of 0% in Latin America and the Caribbean. Of the 785 million women across LMICs who do not use mobile internet, the majority, almost 60%, live in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. There are also some large gender gaps that persist throughout the mobile internet user journey. So we use this simple framework to understand what is preventing women from owning a mobile phone all the way through to using mobile internet regularly and accessing its full potential. And the gender gap tends to widen at each stage of this journey. So the gender gap in mobile ownership of any type of handset is 8% across LMICs. And this figure has been similar for a number of years, highlighting that those who still do not have a mobile phone are proving difficult to reach. But it's also important to look at what type of handset people own, as smartphone owners are significantly more likely to use mobile internet. But women still own typically more basic handsets than men and are 13% less likely to own a smartphone, a gender gap that has narrowed slightly between 2022 and 2023. If we move now to awareness of mobile internet, women are still less likely than men to be aware of it. However, awareness levels are relatively high, with over 80% of men and women aware of it in most survey countries. However, mobile internet awareness does not always translate into adoption, and there are many people, particularly women, who are aware of mobile internet but don't use it, suggesting that there are other barriers preventing them from doing so. And despite that narrowing in 2023 of the mobile internet gender gap that I discussed, this gender gap is still high at 15%. And beyond just mobile internet adoption, it's also important to compare how regularly women and men use mobile internet and whether it's meeting their life needs to the same extent. And despite that persistent gender gap in adoption in most survey countries, once men and women become mobile internet users, the vast majority tend to use it every day. But most of these daily users, especially women, only use it for a limited range of purposes. We cannot forget to address the gender gap in mobile use, especially given this year we found that women who use mobile internet were more likely than men to report that they would like to use it more than they currently do. And this was true for more than half of female mobile internet users in Ethiopia, Kenya, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. So in order to tackle these gaps, it's essential to understand what stops women and men from adopting and using mobile internet. Across countries, our research found that once women are aware of mobile internet, they said the top barriers preventing them from adopting it are affordability, primarily of internet-enabled handsets, and a lack of literacy in digital skills. These are the same barriers for men, but millions more women face these barriers because they are much more likely to be offline. Women also tend to experience these barriers more acutely due to social norms and structural inequalities, including disparities in education and income. This year, for the first time, we also asked men and women who already use mobile internet what stops them from using it more. We found that across our survey countries, the top reported barriers to further use were not as clear-cut as the barriers to adoption, and they varied more by country. However, overall, safety and security concerns was the top reported barrier preventing men and women who use mobile internet from using it more. And this was in fact one of the top 3 reported barriers for women mobile internet users in all our survey countries and for men in almost all. These concerns included those related to reliability of information found online, scams or fraud, information security, unwanted contact from strangers, and fears of being exposed to harmful content. And these were concerns that were particularly prevalent in Mexico, Guatemala, Indonesia, and India. For example, 50% of women and 45% of men who use mobile internet in Indonesia reported safety and security concerns as the main reason they don't use it more. Further research in our 12 survey countries that features in the Mobile Gender Gap Report suggests that the magnitude of these concerns is more widespread than the actual prevalence of the negative experiences when using mobile internet for men or for women. Nevertheless, these concerns are still extremely important to address to ensure that people aren't deterred from accessing mobile internet, but also that they feel confident they can keep themselves safe whilst using it. The second reported barrier to further mobile internet use is affordability, and this is primarily of data, but also of handsets. And it's important to note that handsets and data are already less affordable for women than men due to issues such as the gender pay gap and also women's lower employment rates. Addressing these barriers is a challenge, and that's especially in the context of today with high inflation, climate crises, and geopolitical shocks affecting entire populations. However, the potential socioeconomic benefits of doing so are substantial. Closing the mobile gender gap will have a positive impact on women users. It will benefit society, industry, and economies more broadly, as well as contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including those related to education, health, poverty reduction, and of course, gender equality. So what can stakeholders do to address the mobile gender gap? Our full report does provide more specific recommendations for different stakeholders, but here are 4 high-level actions to consider. Firstly, to ensure that there is a focus on gender equality and reaching women at the organizational and policy level through senior leaders championing the issue and setting gender-specific targets. An example of this is our Connected Women Commitment Initiative, where since 2016, more than 50 operators have set formal targets to increase the proportion of women in their customer base. They've now collectively reached over 70 million additional women with mobile internet and mobile money services. Gender disaggregated data is also crucial. It's crucial for measuring the gender gap and informing investments and action to address it. While our survey does fill an important data gap, much more data is needed to understand women's mobile use, their needs, and the barriers they face, especially in different contexts and among specific groups. When it comes to designing and implementing mobile-related products, services, policies, and initiatives, stakeholders should ensure that women's needs, circumstances, and challenges are explicitly addressed. And this includes the key barriers faced by women, but also the consideration of social norms that can contribute to women experiencing these barriers more acutely than men. A couple of examples when it comes to two of the barriers mentioned earlier: affordability. So this could be improved by policies and initiatives that lower the upfront cost of mobile handsets, particularly internet-enabled handsets, which has the potential to disproportionately benefit women. This could be through lowering mobile-specific taxes or handset financing initiatives. And then literacy and digital skills. An example could be mobile operators, policymakers, the development community, and others investing in mobile digital skills training that purposefully target women as well as men to increase their digital literacy and confidence levels. And finally, collaborate and partner with different stakeholders to address the mobile gender gap, as the barriers women face are complex and they are interrelated. So it is yet to be determined whether mobile gender gaps continue to narrow, but it will require informed, targeted action from industry, policymakers, development community, and other stakeholders in order to do so. In a world that's becoming more digitized, it's essential that women are not left behind. If you want to know more, you can read the full report, which is out today. Thank you very much for listening.